Nick Nurse surprised a lot of Raptors fans when he announced the starting lineup for the Toronto Raptors versus the Cleveland Cavaliers, which had Scottie Barnes and Gary Trent Jr., two players who were returning back from injury, have them coming off the bench. But there is something a lot of people are not realizing. Nick Nurse is a genius, and he just made a move that was a master plan. Nick Nurse is doing something very interesting with the Toronto Raptors, and I'm going to be explaining that in today's video. So if you're ready to watch this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And with that being said, let's get into today's video. Now, as you guys know, I do like to give out shoutouts on my channel. And for today's video, the shoutout goes out to LFax. Thank you so much for supporting this channel with your likes and comments. It is very much appreciated. Now, when we talk about starting lineups, there's a few things to note that not a lot of people had realized about Nick Nurse. Now, obviously, the Raptors lineup, which had been this lineup since pretty much last year, where they decided to have Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Gary Trent Jr., and Scottie Barnes in the starting lineup. But in the limited minutes they have played this season together, their net rating is a minus 6.1. So you may question, was Nick Nurse right in making this decision? Now, when you compare that to the starting lineup that he had the other day, although it's a very small sample size and they had only played 15 minutes together, you notice the difference in net rating. That lineup of Thaddeus Young, Pascal Siakam, Juancho Hernangomez, Fred VanVleet, and OG Anunoby actually had a positive net rating of 6.9. Now, why is this? Is this because Gary Trent Jr. and Scottie Barnes aren't better than Juancho Hernangomez and Thaddeus Young? Absolutely not. In fact, a lot of people fail to understand this. It's not so much that they are bad players or those other players are better than them. It's more about the fit. This is something I have preached on this channel several times this past year, whereas you can't have 5 guys in your starting lineup all wanting to shoot the ball. Now, inserting 2 role players in Thaddeus Young and Juancho Hernangomez has allowed the Raptors to not only have a positive net rating, but their defensive rating has been a lot better as well. And for those who may suggest that, well, the starting lineup of Pascal, Scottie, Gary, OG, and Fred had only played limited minutes. In fact, when you take a look at last year, where they had accumulated 345 minutes the entire season, they only had a net rating of positive 0.5. So why is this? There's so much to dissect here because a lot of people do not realize that this doesn't necessarily work out the best because you can't just have your 5 best players out there. You need to mix and match some players. In fact, I did some research. I went across the Eastern Conference, and as it currently stands, I took a look at the top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference, and I found something very interesting. And I went through the different lineups of each Eastern Conference teams, and especially the top 3 teams here. I realized that each of those teams, particularly these top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference, all of them have one thing in common. They have at least 2 players in their starting lineup that are attempting less than 10 field goal attempts per game. Take example of the Boston Celtics. They have Al Horford and Derek White. The Milwaukee Bucks have Javon Carter and Grayson Allen. And the Cleveland Cavaliers have Jared Allen and Karis LeVert that are averaging less than 10 field goal attempts per game. Now, you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with the Raptors? Why are we talking about other Eastern Conference teams? Well, when you take a look at the Raptors and where the starters stand in terms of field goal attempts per game, you take a look at from Fred VanVleet to Gary Trent Jr. to OG Anunoby, who are all averaging more than 13 field goal attempts per game. Now, you may question, what's the big deal about this? It's because you need some role players in your starting lineup. This leads to a lot of inconsistent play from your starters. We saw this last year with the Raptors. We saw it this year as well, although they've played limited minutes because of injuries, but we know the pecking order is Pascal Siakam. But no one really knows who's the second, third, and fourth options. That's why it leads to a lot of inconsistent plays through the remaining 4 starters. That is why you see the Raptors have some nights where Gary Trent Jr. is taking 15-20 shots. Other nights is Fred VanVleet. Other times it's OG and Scottie Barnes. So it leads to a lot of inconsistent shots and not consistent roles, but also the fact that guys like Scottie Barnes and OG Anunoby need to develop their games further, and this really does not help them when they're not shooting consistently and they don't know what their roles are offensively. I also wanted to quickly point out 2 players like Juancho Hernangomez and Thaddeus Young as well. Now, in his 3 starts this season, again, I don't want to focus so much on the points and the rebounds. Shout out to StatMuse for this, but I wanted to more so focus on the field goal attempts. And out of the 3 games he has started for the Toronto Raptors this season, he has not had one single game where he has taken more than 3 field goal attempts per game. Now, you need role players like this in your starting lineup because not only does it allow Pascal Siakam to excel in his role, it also lets other guys like OG Anunoby take a lot more shots and be more comfortable offensively. And same thing with Thaddeus Young as well. The good thing about inserting role players in your starting lineup is it allows your main guys to take a step forward while the role players know their roles and they understand that well they're not going to be taking 15 shots a game. Again, same thing with Thaddeus Young. He has only had one game out of the 7 games he has started for the Toronto Raptors where he has taken more than 10 field goal attempts per game. So these are some of the things I really wanted to address in terms of having role players as opposed to having Gary Trent Jr. and Scottie Barnes. Now, I know the big question with a lot of fans has been, why Scottie Barnes? It's not like he deserves to be on the bench, and I completely agree. And some fans will suggest, well, why don't we have Fred VanVleet come off the bench? It's simple. When you logically think about why Scottie Barnes is coming off of the bench, you essentially allow the offense to run through him. Having Scottie Barnes come off the bench, not only do you have a shooter with him coming off the bench, Gary Trent Jr., you can also mix and match and play him with different starters as well. For example, if we were to use this lineup here of Scottie Barnes, Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Chris Boucher, and Christian Koloko, what this allows Scottie Barnes to do that he does not get the freedom to do in the starting lineup is essentially have the ball more so in his hands and run the offense through him. We know Pascal is going to get his shots, and understandably so, as he is the Raptors' best shot creator. But having Scottie Barnes come off the bench allows him to essentially run the offense, take more of a bigger offensive role, and also take more shots as well, and let him accelerate in the areas that he's really good at, which is particularly in the paint. And he can't necessarily do that because obviously Pascal is also excelling in that same area that he is. So by doing this, you essentially allow Scottie Barnes to be the main guy coming off the bench while still allowing him to play a decent amount of minutes. And I do want to point to a few other things as well, besides the fact that I think you can really develop Scottie Barnes more off of the bench because you can allow him to take more shots, a little bit more freedom by having the ball in his hands. But also, I wanted to pinpoint the fact that a lot of the Raptors' main problems last season was playing the starters too many heavy minutes. In fact, if you ignore the first two players who played 4 and 3 games, you see where Pascal and Fred VanVleet rank in minutes played. And again, this is last season. And not only them, but OG Anunoby you see in the 11th spot and Scottie Barnes in the 17th. And Gary Trent Jr. wasn't too far down on this list as he averaged 35 minutes per game. Now, this was a big issue because by the time the playoffs rolled around, the Raptors starters were exhausted. It led to injuries as well, and they had no fuel left by the time the playoffs rolled around. So by doing this, what you essentially do, it allows you to rotate your players a little bit by playing guys like Juancho Hernan-Gomez, Thaddeus Young 15-20 minutes in the starting lineup while having guys like Gary Trent Jr. and Scottie Barnes coming off of the bench and playing them 25 to 32 minutes a game. So you essentially allow your wealth to spread a little bit. Let me give you an example. If you had $50,000, would you bet all of the $50,000 on one bet, or would you do 5 different bets where you bet $10,000? The Raptors are in a similar position as well. Although Scottie Barnes is likely to return in the starting lineup, I think it's better to spread some of your starters around like this, as you see with other Eastern Conference teams as well. For example, the Boston Celtics. Malcolm Brogdon is definitely a better player than Derek White. Why is Derek White starting over him? It's simple. You spread your wealth around. You allow some of the starters to play, and then you have some of the bench come in as well and play just as well as the starters. And just because you're playing off of the bench, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll finish the game on the bench. As we saw with last game, Scottie Barnes did finish the game with the Raptors, and it allowed him to play with the starters as well. So I think it works out both well for the starters as well as Scottie Barnes coming off of the bench as well. But again, it's very unlikely we do see that moving forward, but I think that is something the Raptors should strongly consider. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you think the Raptors should use Scottie and Gary Trent Jr. off of the bench, or would you like to see them back in the starting lineup? Let me know your thoughts down below. And as always, I do have a trivia question for you today. And that trivia question is, how many players on the Raptors roster are from Europe? Is it A3? Is it B1? Is it C2? Or is it D5? So whoever answers this trivia question correctly first in the comment section gets a shout out in my next video. So if you want to see more of these kind of unique videos based on the Toronto Raptors, make sure to hit the subscribe button as well. And that will be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you guys have yourselves a great day.